Beyond Ukraine, the Russian threat is there, and it affects the countries of Europe. Russia has become, as I speak, and for years to come, a threat to France and Europe. I deeply regret this.
Fear grips Europe as French President Emmanuel Macron delivers a stark warning. Russia is no longer just a concern for Ukraine, but a direct threat to France and the continent. We are entering a new era, Macron declared in a solemn evening address, urging European nations to prepare for a long-term security challenge.
All in all, our prosperity and security have become more uncertain, and it has to be said that we are entering a new era. It is not only the Ukrainian people who are courageously fighting for their freedom, but also our own security that is under threat. Indeed, if one country can invade its neighbor in Europe with impunity, then nobody can be sure of anything anymore. And it's the law of the strongest that applies, and peace can no longer be guaranteed on our own continent. History has taught us this. Beyond Ukraine, the Russian threat is there, and it affects the countries of Europe.
He warned that Moscow is strengthening its military at an alarming pace, planning to add 300,000 more soldiers, 3,000 tanks, and 300 fighter jets by 2030.
Russia continues to rearm, spending over 40% of its budget for this purpose. By 2030, it plans to further expand its army, adding 3,000 soldiers, 3,000 tanks, and 300 fighter jets. In this context, who can believe that today's Russia will stop at Ukraine? Russia has become, as I speak, and for years to come, a threat to France and Europe. I deeply regret this, and I am convinced that in the long term, peace will come to our continent with a Russia that is once again at peace. But the situation I'm describing is just that.
The French leader described Russia's influence war as extending far beyond conventional battlefields, warning of threats in the air, social media, and cyberspace. His speech carried an unmistakable sense of urgency, calling on European nations to reevaluate their defense policies before it's too late. Macron made a bold proposition, extending France's nuclear deterrence to protect European allies. As the only EU nation with nuclear weapons, France has long maintained an independent deterrent. However, amid increasing Russian threats and growing concerns from Germany and other European states, Macron signaled a shift in doctrine. The French president pointed out that his administration had already doubled the military budget over the past decade. But with Russia ramping up its military spending, allocating over 40% of its budget to defense, Macron insisted that Europe must respond accordingly.
So in this time of action that is finally opening up, France has a special status. We have the most effective army in Europe, and thanks to the choice made by our elders after the Second World War, we have nuclear deterrence capabilities. This protects us much more than many of our neighbors. What's more, we didn't wait for the invasion of Ukraine to take stock of a worrying world. And through the two military programming laws that I decided on, and that successive parliaments have voted for, we will have doubled the budget for our armed forces in almost 10 years. But in view of the threats posed by this acceleration I have just described, we will have to make new budgetary choices and additional investments, which have now become indispensable. I have asked the government to work on this as quickly as possible.
Addressing Germany's call for an extended nuclear umbrella, Macron reassured allies while maintaining that any nuclear decision would remain firmly in French hands.
Our nuclear deterrent protects us. It's complete, sovereign, French from start to finish. Since 1964, it has explicitly played a role in preserving peace and security in Europe. responding to the historic appeal of the future German Chancellor. I have decided to open the strategic debate on the protection of our allies on the European continent by our deterrent. Whatever happens, the decision has always been and will remain in the hands of the President of the Republic, head of the armed forces, controlling our destiny, becoming more independent. We need to work on this both militarily and economically.
Macron's warnings were met with swift and scornful reactions from Russian officials. Former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev mocked the French leader's speech, ridiculing his concerns about Russia as exaggerated and irrelevant. Medvedev wasted no time in dismissing him. Medvedev posted a tweet on X, where the message read, "Russia has become, as I speak to you and for years to come, a threat to France and Europe," says Macron. Macron himself poses no big threat, though. He'll disappear forever no later than May 14th, 2027, and he won't be missed. The former Russian president, now deputy head of Russia's Security Council, has been known for issuing provocative threats to the West, including warnings of nuclear strikes on London. His remarks reinforced Moscow's consistent message: Europe should not expect Russia to back down. Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova also took aim at Macron, delivering a sarcastic response. Macron's speech turned out to be truly spring-like. She continued her attack, mocking France's military strength. It has now become clear that the strongest army in Europe belongs to Emmanuel. But Zelensky says it's his. It's very important that these two have found a common activity in measurement. Zakharova also raised questions about diplomatic relations. Despite Macron's speech portraying Russia as an enduring enemy, France is still sending a new ambassador to Moscow.
The most surprising thing, a new French ambassador is planning to visit us. Recently, he shared his thoughts about wanting to develop relations with our country. But today, his President Macron admitted that peace in Europe is not a priority for France, that they intend to pacify Russia, and so on with the rest of the same rhetoric. So why is the French ambassador coming to us? We'd like to clarify once again.
Macron's speech came just ahead of a high-stakes European Union summit in Brussels, where leaders of the 27 EU nations are scrambling to craft a path forward on the war in Ukraine. With Washington's support wavering and Russian forces gaining ground, Europe is being forced to take greater responsibility for the war's outcome. However, unity remains elusive. Some EU members, wary of further escalation, fear that Macron's push for a stronger European defense could drag the continent deeper into conflict. Others, particularly in Eastern Europe, see his speech as a necessary wake-up call